Helen.
Hello.
I'm Belle from Nottingham College. I'm just going to be asking you some questions today about your book.
Great.
So I'm actually going to quote you here
Okay.
from your book. My mum was enthralled with ME, spending all her time researching it, talking about it, and going to an ME group. I knew it was her favourite child. So I just want to ask you, did you feel unimportant or like left out of that? So I think the statement, I knew it was her favourite child, is quite a strong word. Can you just talk about that for us?
Yeah, sure. So I think my mum's whole life revolved around her having ME and, having rests every afternoon and going to the ME group, like I say, and that was really her identity. I was very much secondary to that.
You even quoted that she even stated once that you made her condition worse. How do you think that affected you as a young child? To hear that from a mother or a parent?
Yeah, I mean, she blamed me for getting the ME in various different ways, and I think obviously that massively impacts how you feel about yourself. I really felt like I was a failure, like I couldn't do anything right, and that I had made her life bad. And
how did that affect you going into adulthood? How did you overcome that?
So it affected me quite a lot in my teenage years.
Yes.
I had really bad self-esteem issues. I really hated myself. I self-harmed. I had a suicide attempt, and yeah, I really hated myself.
And how did you, if she knew about it, how did your mother react to the issues that you had? Perhaps suicide attempt, self-harm. Was she aware of that?
I mean, I imagine she was. Being a parent myself now, I would be surprised if she didn't realise I was going off to my room and crying every night. I'd be surprised if she didn't know I was getting knives and cutting myself, but she didn't appear to know anything.
Wow.
She didn't say anything to me or anything like that. I'm not sure about the suicide attempt. She did find out when I was a bit older, when I was in my 20s. I told her, and her reaction was, for goodness sake, don't tell your dad.
Wow.
And so it was very much like she didn't really have any reaction or feelings about what was happening. And it was very much put on me like I was the problem. I had a problem, and that, there's something wrong with me, rather than me reacting to circumstances.
Wow, that's really amazing, Helen. Thank you. And there's another one. We actually watched your other interview, so I'm going to quote it from it. You said that you don't resent your mother, or you don't have much resent towards her. So if you don't, or if you do, how did you overcome it, and have you overcame it?
I don't know. I want to use the word resent. Maybe I don't feel very much anger towards her.
Yep.
And part of that is a reaction because it's such an unnatural emotion for me to feel towards my mum. I think the idea of forgiveness is quite a hard one. I'm a Christian, and so I believe in forgiveness, but I believe it's this kind of ongoing daily choice.
Yes.
And it's much more about releasing myself from her and from what happened than about saying it's okay, because it wasn't okay.
No.
And it will never be okay.
When your mother died, did you have any anger when she died, or any emotions that you wouldn't really consider grieving?
Yeah. It was really interesting, actually, because when my dad died, obviously I was really upset. But when my mum died, I felt like I'd been absolutely broken. It was a really catastrophic grief. And I didn't expect that, because obviously our relationship was so fractured. But I guess it's because it was so much more complicated. Yeah.
Did you follow other people or that's been through situations like this and have a community?
No, in a word. No, I think when I was going through it, it was so heavy, and I had my small children to look after. I just didn't even consider looking anywhere for help, because I think it was such an unusual situation. And I think as well it was a process of coming to terms with what had happened, slowly understanding that my mum was probably not normal, and that this situation wasn't her being ill, it was Munchausen's.
How did you feel when you realised what was wrong with your mum?
I guess it was lots of stages.
Yeah.
So the biggest one for me was realising that she had faked the ME, because that had been such a huge part of my childhood, and not just you know, at the time, but also the choices I'd made for my future had always been based around what my mum needed. And it felt like the world had been turned upside down. Literally, I felt like I couldn't know what was true, whether someone who was talking to me was telling me a lie or whether they were telling me the truth.
When your mum was alive, did you ever suspect that her ME was not true?
Yeah, it's this really funny thing. I think it's hard to explain gaslighting because it sounds so stupid. Like, why on earth would you believe something that you can see is untrue? And yet there's such power in it. And yeah, so there were moments when I thought, well, that's not true. And I knew that, I suppose I would have said she was possibly exaggerating.
Yeah.
And it's only when you put it all together that you're like, oh yeah, it's so obvious when you know. But I think you don't go into relationships expecting people to fake an illness. So if you're invested in them, you're not going to call them up on it, because what an awful friend or relative you'd be.
Upon reading your book, it was quite a common theme that you stated that, you know, you were quite expected, you know, to be on the phone or to call or to, you know, be there, be around. Did that bear a big weight on you, you know, in your adulthood? You know, did you feel like that held you back in any way?
Yeah, so I felt like there was an enormous responsibility on me always from being very young for my parents and specifically my mum. And I think if I hadn't have had children when the final stages of my mum's life were happening, it would have been more tricky, probably.
It's really interesting. So you feel like your children kind of saved you in a way,
Oh,
pulled you out.
massively. Yeah.
Well, that's a really respectable thing, because I think generational trauma is a massive thing, and you know, as parents, you know, we often repeat the patterns of our guardians. It's really admirable.
I think people who've been through childhood abuse generally do go on to be good parents, because it's not a situation where you're like, you continue the damage. I think it's generally that people are like, I never want that to happen to my kids.
No, thank you so much for interviewing with us, Helen.